the zero that changed everything 7 years after it happened. I was sitting in a waiting room outside a professional conduct hearing, rehearsing my testimony against a teacher who still thought I was just a bitter former student angry about a bad grade. But before there was a hearing, a complaint, or a licensing board with my name on their agenda, there was a single red number written at the top of a paper when I was 16. A zero. A zero that didn't just drop my grade. It rewrote my entire future. Back then, I was the kind of student teachers loved to point at when they wanted to inspire a class. "Look at Maya's notes," they'd say. "That's what effort looks like." I was the quiet kid in the front row with color-coded pens and a planner full of sticky notes. I wasn't the smartest person in the school, but I was the most relentlessly prepared. I didn't have family connections or a college fund. I had a GPA that was supposed to be my ticket out. By the middle of 10th grade, my plan was simple: keep my 4, stack every honors class I could, get into APs, then apply for the state merit scholarship that would pay for most of college if you graduated with the right grades and rigor. There was one class I obsessed over more than the others: Honors English. Honors English wasn't just another line on my schedule. It was the gatekeeper. You needed an A in it to get into AP English Language as a junior. And that AP credit was practically highlighted on every scholarship brochure they handed out at the counseling office. The teacher was Ms. Donovan. She was one of those legend teachers everyone warned you about in middle school. Donovan's class is no joke. She grades like a college professor. She failed half the class last year. Most of that was exaggeration, but the core was true. She took herself and her subject very seriously. Late 30s, sharp bob haircut, crisp blouses, red lipstick that never smudged. She kept a framed Teacher of the Year plaque behind her desk and a quote above the whiteboard that said, "Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one is watching." She loved that quote. She pointed to it at least once a week. By May, I had a 96 average in her class. I'd obsessed over every paragraph of every essay, rewritten papers for a couple of extra points, and practically memorized the literary terms list. I needed that alike I needed air. Then she announced the final exam. She wrote the weight on the board in big blue marker. Final exam, 40% of semester grade. 40%. Almost half. "This exam will determine whether you're ready for AP," she said, walking in front of the room with her arms folded. "It's comprehensive. It will separate those of you who have actually done the work from those who have been coasting." A few kids groaned. I did the math automatically in my head. With a 96 going in, if I got an A, I'd stay solidly in a territory. If I got a B, I'd probably land somewhere around a 90-92. Even a C would hurt, but I could maybe survive with an 88, a 0. I didn't even let myself finish that calculation. "The rules are simple," she continued. "On exam day, no phones, no bags by your desks, no notes, no talking, no bathroom breaks once we begin. You will have a pen, a pencil, an eraser, and your test. If I see your eyes on anything but your own paper, I will assume you are cheating. The consequence is a 0 and an academic dishonesty referral. There are no warnings. She looked around the room the way a lifeguard scans a pool, eyes sharp, searching for trouble. When her gaze passed over me, I sat up straighter without meaning to. I had never cheated on anything in my life. I was the person who got angry when people whispered answers during quizzes because it dragged down the curve. It didn't occur to me that I could possibly be the one she'd ever accuse. For 2 weeks, that exam lived in my head. I made flashcards, reread our novels, wrote practice theses, and timed essays. My mom would walk past my door at midnight and say, "Maya lights. You're going to burn yourself out before the test." "I'm almost done," I'd lie, finishing one more page of notes. The night before the exam, I hardly slept. I kept dreaming I showed up late and the door was locked, or I opened the packet and realized it was in a language I couldn't read. Classic anxiety brain. The morning of, the school felt like an airport security line. Desks had been rearranged into single-file rows with wide gaps between them. Ms. Donovan made us line our backpacks against the back wall and power our phones all the way off, not just silent. She walked the aisles checking pockets and desk surfaces like a TSA agent. "Nothing on your desk except your pen, pencil, and the test," she said. "If you need a tissue, raise your hand. I will bring it to you. If you drop your pencil, raise your hand. Do not wander the room. Understood?" A weak chorus of "Yes, Ms. Donovan." I could feel sweat between my shoulder blades and my fingers, even though the room was freezing. She handed out the exams face down. The paper felt heavier than normal, like it knew it was carrying 40% of my future on it. "You may begin," she said. The first section was multiple choice: themes, tone, literary devices. I breathed a little easier. These were patterns I recognized. The weeks of flashcards actually mattered. The second section was short answer. Identify a symbol. Explain a character's motivation. Quote a line that supports your interpretation. I wrote in my neatest, smallest handwriting, terrified of running out of room. The last section was the essay. We had to choose one of 3 prompts and write a full literary analysis. I picked the one about how a character's internal conflict mirrors a larger social conflict. It fit perfectly with the novel we just finished. I sketched a quick outline on the back page and then let my pen take over, lost in the rhythm of topic sentence, quote, analysis, transition. At some point, my hand started cramping. I paused, flexed my fingers, and let my eyes lift from the page for just a second to refocus. That's when I saw him. Liam. He sat 1 row over and 1 seat ahead, slightly diagonal from me. He was smart, but careless, one of those people who could pull a B without trying and didn't care much about going higher. His head was turned just enough that his line of sight was clear. To my paper. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe he was staring into space, and my paranoia was filling in the gaps. Then I watched his eyes track across my page as my pen moved, left to right, line to line. Cold prickles crawled up the back of my neck. I pulled the exam closer to my chest and angled my arm. His gaze flicked back to his own paper. Ms. Donovan was at the front of the room, writing something on a sticky note, her back turned. She didn't see. A part of me, the part that loves justice, the part that bristles when people cut in line, wanted to shoot my hand up and say, "He's looking at my test." That's what her quote on the wall would say the person of integrity should do. The bigger part of me pictured 30 heads turning, 30 pairs of eyes stabbing into me. I pictured Liam denying it, Ms. Donovan thinking I was trying to distract from something, or turning her laser focus on our corner of the room for the rest of the exam. I pictured losing minutes of writing time to drama. So I did what quiet, rule-following kids are trained to do. I curled my arm tighter around my paper and kept working. 5 minutes, Ms. Donovan announced. I reread my essay, fixed a phrase, and added one more sentence to my conclusion. When she called time, I set my pen down, heart still racing a little from the Liam incident, but mostly relieved. We were told to leave our exams face up and stay seated while she collected them. She walked down the rows, stacking booklets. When she reached Liam, she paused. "What's that?" she asked. His shoulders jerked. "What's what?" he said, too quickly. She reached down and pulled something from under his exam. A folded piece of paper. Even from 2 desks away, I could see the panic drain the color from his face. She unfolded it slowly. On the inside were bullet-pointed definitions, quotes, page numbers, the exact kind of thing you decopy from a study guide if you were building a cheat sheet. The air in the room snapped taut. No one moved. No phones, she had said. No notes. And there it was, notes. "Liam," she said, voice dangerously calm. "Do you want to explain this?" He swallowed. I wrote that before. I wasn't using it, I swear. I just forgot it was there. I could feel everyone's pity and horror swirling together. Getting caught with a cheat sheet in Ms. Donovan's final was like getting caught sneaking a knife through airport security. She looked at the paper, then let her gaze travel slowly down the row, across the aisle, and land on me. My stomach dropped. "Class, remain in your seats," she said. "No talking." She finished collecting the exams, then returned to the front, cheat sheet in hand. "This classroom," she said, "I expect more than memorization. I expect integrity. Unfortunately, today, some of you have shown me you have neither." Her eyes cut to me again. I frowned without meaning to, confusion battling with fear. "I have 2 students," she continued, "who decided that the rules didn't apply to them. One who brought unauthorized notes into a high-stakes exam, and another who allowed cheating off their paper and did nothing." The room might as well have exploded. The gasp was that loud. Allowed cheating. I knew in that instant exactly who she meant. I also knew just as instantly that she was wrong. I hadn't allowed anything. I'd been trying to protect my work. "Ms. Donovan, I started. "Not another word," she snapped. "You can both stay after the bell. We'll address this then." Her gaze flicked between me and Liam like we were insects pinned to a board. The rest of the period dragged, every second heavy with whispers I couldn't quite hear. The bell finally rang. Everyone else scrambled to get out, throwing us those sideways looks people reserve for car crashes and gossip. When the door closed, it was just the 3 of us. "Up here," she said. We approached her desk like defendants. She laid the cheat sheet between us. "Whose handwriting?" she asked. Liam stared at it. "Mine," he admitted. "So you acknowledge that you brought this into my exam?" "Yes, ma'am," he said miserably. "But I swear I wasn't using it." I didn't even look at it. Her eyes were flat. That's irrelevant. It was present. That's a violation. Then she turned to me. And you, she said, do you have anything to say about why you allowed your classmate to copy off your exam? My mouth went dry. I didn't allow anything, I said, hearing the tremor in my own voice. I noticed him looking once, and I covered my paper. I didn't know he had notes. I was trying to finish my essay. I didn't cheat. I never cheat. You expect me to believe you didn't notice him? She demanded. You're telling me you saw nothing until I picked up his exam. I saw him look once, and I covered my work, I said, desperate for her to hear the logic. I was scared to raise my hand and cause a scene. I didn't help him. You can compare our answers, our essays. That's not the point, she cut in. Integrity means doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it costs you. You had an obligation to inform me immediately. You chose to stay silent because you valued your comfort more than honesty. That's not, I started. It is, she said sharply. And silence in the face of cheating is complicity. She picked up our test booklets. For a tiny, hopeful second, I thought maybe we were just getting a lecture, just a warning. Then she pulled out her red pen. In one deliberate stroke, she drew a 0 at the top of Liam's exam. Then she did the same to mine. Watching that ink soak into the paper felt like watching someone pour gasoline on my future and light a match. Both of you will receive a 0 on this exam, she said, and I will be filing an academic dishonesty report with administration. Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes. I clenched my jaw until my teeth hurt. Please, I said, the word dragging itself out of my throat. Please don't do this. Ms. Donovan, you know my work. You know I don't cheat. You've had me all year. Look at my essays, my tests. Compare them. I've never, she didn't flinch. I don't make exceptions based on past performance, she said. Good students don't get special treatment. In fact, I hold you to a higher standard. I am deeply disappointed, Maya, disappointed. The word felt worse than angry. I'm not asking for special treatment, I said, voice cracking. I'm asking you to believe me. I'm telling you the truth. She shook her head. The truth, she said, is that 2 students violated my trust today. You can tell your parents there will be a conference tomorrow at 8 a.m. with the assistant principal. I suggest you think very carefully about your choices before then. I'll take the blame, Liam blurted suddenly. It was my cheat sheet. I was the one who copied. Just give me the 0. She didn't help. For a second, hope flared again in my chest. Here it was, a confession. Miss Donovan's expression didn't soften. This isn't about punishment, Liam, she said coldly. It's about principles. I will not reward either of you for trying to game the system. This decision is final. She dismissed us with a flick of her hand. I walked out of that room in a daze. The hallway sounds, lockers slamming, people laughing, someone shouting for their friend, felt far away, like I was underwater. When I checked the online gradebook that afternoon, the 0 was already entered. My 96 average had plummeted to a 61. From A to D in a single keystroke. Notifications pinged as my other teachers posted updates, but my eyes were glued to that one line. English 10 honors, 61 academic dishonesty. Cheating on final exam. I heard my mom come in from work behind me and drop her keys on the counter. How'd the exam go? She asked, voice hopeful. I couldn't answer. She stepped closer, saw the screen, and went very, very still. "What is this?" she whispered. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a number anymore. It wasn't just one angry teacher. It was an accusation stamped into the system that would follow me into scholarship committees and college applications. One red zero. One word I'd never imagined next to my name. Cheater. And the worst part was knowing I hadn't done it, and that, at least for now, no one in power cared. By the time I went to bed that night, the word cheating felt like it was carved into my forehead. I'd washed my face, brushed my teeth, put on my pajamas, and crawled under the covers like any other school night. But my brain wouldn't shut up. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red zero at the top of my exam. The way Ms. Donovan's neat handwriting made it look almost elegant, as if she were proud of it. I saw her mouth forming the word disappointed, like I'd done it to her on purpose. I barely slept. When my alarm went off, my stomach already hurt. My mom had taken the morning off work for the meeting. That alone told me how serious this was. She never took time during the week unless it was a doctor's appointment or something on fire. She didn't ask whether I wanted breakfast. She just slid a piece of toast toward me and said, "Eat something. You'll need your energy." I tried. The bread turned to paste in my mouth. "Mom," I said finally, "what if they don't believe me?" She looked up from her coffee, eyes tired but sharp. "The question is if," she said. "We are going in there with facts, not feelings. Either they address them or they show us exactly what kind of people they are. That's it. Facts." I grabbed onto that word like a life raft. We got to school before the first bell, the hall still half empty. The secretary at the front desk gave us a sympathetic look when my mom said our names. "They're expecting you," she said, like it was a dentist appointment. The assistant principal's office smelled like coffee and dry erase markers, just like yesterday. Mr. Ames sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, tie slightly crooked, trying too hard to look relaxed and approachable. Ms. Donovan was already there, back straight, a neat manila folder placed perfectly in front of her. "Good morning," Mr. Ames said. "Thanks for coming in." My mom didn't sit immediately. She shook his hand, then looked straight at Ms. Donovan. "I'm here because my daughter has been accused of something she says she didn't do," she said. "I want to see the evidence." Ms. Donovan's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly, like the word evidence offended her. "We're here to go over the incident and the school's discipline process," Mr. Ames said, gesturing to the chairs. "We take academic dishonesty very seriously." "So do we," my mom said, sitting. "That's why we're not just letting this slide." He cleared his throat. "Let's start with Ms. Donovan's account." She spoke like she was delivering a lecture. She described the exam procedures, the rules she'd set, the cheat sheet she'd found under Liam's paper. Then she described me, how she'd observed suspicious eye movements, and how I de-angled my paper in a way that suggested I was trying to conceal my work after noticing another student looking at it. That concealment, she said, combined with her failure to notify me of the cheating, meets the criteria for aiding and abetting academic dishonesty in my classroom. She said it so calmly you'd think she'd watched me hand Liam a copy of my answer key. When she finished, Mr. Ames looked at me. "Maya, Is there anything you want to add? Add. My voice sounded small in the office. I didn't cheat, I said, forcing myself to speak clearly. I didn't give him answers. I didn't know he had notes. I saw him look at my paper once, and I covered it. I didn't say anything because I was scared my test time would get cut and I'd fail. I was just trying to finish like everyone else. My mom leaned forward. What about the tests themselves? Have you compared their answers, their essays? I have scanned them, Ms. Donovan said. There are similarities in some multiple choice responses, but that's to be expected. It's not a randomized exam. So no proof we matched beyond what any two students might share, my mom said. And the essays, they are different, Ms. Donovan admitted. But again, that is beside the point. This is about conduct during the exam, not the content of their work. Then, let's talk about conduct, my mom said. Maya says she saw him once and covered her paper immediately. Did you see him looking? I saw enough to question it, she said. And the cheat sheet under his exam removes any doubt. She had a duty to report it. She did not. This isn't the army, my mom said. She's 16. She froze. That's not the same as helping him cheat. Mr. Ames lifted his hands in a calming gesture. I understand this is emotional, Mrs. Patel. Of course it's emotional, she cut in. Her grade dropped from an A to a D overnight based on one person's interpretation of eye movements. That report will be in her file when she applies for scholarships. You think that's not emotional? He sighed, glancing at the folder in front of him. Our academic dishonesty policy is clear. The teacher determines whether cheating occurred. We have to trust our staff's professional judgment. Then, I'd like to trust, but verify, my mom said. I want to see the seating chart for that exam. I want to see if there was any hallway camera that could show if they were talking before or after. I want statements from other students sitting nearby who might have seen what happened. Ms. Donovan's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me. If we're going to brand my daughter a cheater, we're going to do more than go off one person's impression, my mom said. I know how this works. I know once that mark goes on her record, it follows her. Mr. Ames shifted in his seat. We don't typically bring other students into these matters, and we don't have cameras inside classrooms. Hallway cameras, she repeated, to see if they communicated before. Or are we only interested in evidence when it supports the accusation? He pressed his lips together. Even if we did all that, the fact remains. Maya noticed cheating and did not alert the teacher. That is a violation under the policy. I stared at the integrity poster on his wall, the black and white photo of a mountain climber reaching for a ledge. The caption read, "Stand up for what's right, even if you stand alone." Apparently that didn't apply if doing so made the adults uncomfortable. So that's it, I asked, hating the quiver in my voice. Her word is final. We have to support our teachers unless there is clear evidence to the contrary, he said. Otherwise, it undermines their authority. I thought the point of school was to teach truth, I said, not just authority. He gave me the kind of look adults give kids when they think we're being dramatic. Sometimes we have to accept consequences for our mistakes. I didn't make a mistake, I said. I wrote an essay and kept my eyes on my paper. The mistake, Ms. Donovan said, was staying silent. We went in circles for another 20 minutes. My mom asked for a formal appeal, asked what the process was to challenge a disciplinary decision. Mr. Ames dug out a thin packet that basically boiled down to, "You can write a statement, and a committee will review the teacher's decision." He made it sound very official, like there was a chance. I could see in his eyes that there was. When we left the office, my mom's jaw was clenched so hard her teeth must have ached. "This isn't over," she said. But part of me suspected that, in the way that mattered most, it already was. Rumors move faster than facts in high school. By lunch, everyone seemed to know that I had cheated on Donovan's final. The details mutated with every retelling. Some people had me passing a cheat sheet. Some had me hooking my phone up to an earbud. Some had me writing answers on my arm. I heard she wrote the essay beforehand and just recopied it, someone whispered in the lunch line behind me. "Nah, it was Liam," another voice said. "They were working together. She's just taking the fall too because she's nice." The version where I was too nice almost hurt more than the villain ones. At least villains get agency. Friends I'd sat with since middle school didn't quite know how to act around me. Some asked what happened, but their eyes had that gleam of hungry curiosity, not concern. "I didn't cheat," I said over and over. He tried to look at my paper. I covered it. "She thinks I should have ratted him out on the spot." "Wow, that sucks," one girl said, stabbing her peas. "But I mean, she wouldn't just make it up. There had to be something." There it was again, the assumption that teachers are neutral, infallible arbiters of reality. I wanted to scream that teachers are just people who get tired, who misinterpret, who dig their heels in when challenged. But in our school, calling that out was like insulting someone's religion. That afternoon, I went to see my guidance counselor, Mrs. Yang. Her office was a closet with posters of universities taped over the electrical panel. "I saw the referral come through," she said, motioning for me to sit. "What happened?" I told her the whole story again. Cheat sheet under Liam's exam. His confession that it was his. Me covering my paper and being punished anyway. She sighed. "Ms. Donovan is strict about academic honesty." "Strict is one thing," I said. "Wrong is another." "I'm not saying she handled it perfectly," Mrs. Yang said. "But from the school's perspective, it's hard to overturn a teacher's judgment on what they saw in their own classroom." "So that's it?" I asked. "I'm just a cheater now." "There will be an annotation on your record for this incident," she said carefully. "If colleges ask, you'll have a chance to explain it in your applications." "Explain that I didn't do it," I said, "and hope they believe me more than my teacher." She didn't answer directly. "My advice is to focus on finishing the semester strong in your other classes and write a thoughtful reflection for the appeal committee. Show that you understand why what happened was a problem, even if you disagree with the punishment." I stared at her. "You want me to write an apology for something I didn't do?" I said. "It doesn't have to be an apology," she said quickly. "Just an acknowledgement. Sometimes that's how these things move forward." I walked out feeling like I'd been handed a script for a confession and told to improvise my remorse. It was only after the dust settled a little that I started hearing other stories. It began in whispers in the library, in the hallway, at the bus stop. "Donovan tried to fail my brother for plagiarism last year," a senior said casually during a group project. "He just used the same quote as another kid," and she went off. My mom had to go to the principal 3 times to get it taken off his record. At lunch, someone else chimed in. She accused my cousin of using spark notes. He hadn't. She said his essay was too advanced for him. There were more. The girl who said Ms. Donovan had ripped up her essay in front of the class for copying an idea she hadn't even seen online. The guy who got a 0 on a quiz because she thought he looked at his lap, even though he insisted he was just cracking his knuckles. She hates when people question her, one boy from the soccer team told me. My friend asked why he got points off on an essay, and she called it arguing and took more points. Has anyone ever reported her? I asked. He shrugged. I mean, people complain, but no one wants to be the one to go up against her. She's tight with the administration. They all love her standards. That was the piece that made my stomach twist. It wasn't that she'd never done anything like this before. It was that no one had ever pushed it far enough for it to become official. No paper trail meant that, on record, she was a dedicated, award-winning English teacher who cared deeply about integrity. Any whispers to the contrary were just noise. My accusation became the first neat line in her file. Academic dishonesty reports students Liam Carter and Maya Patel unauthorized assistance during final exam. The way the form was worded, it sounded like something we'd both walked into the room planning to do. That single line triggered a cascade. I lost my honor roll status for the semester. The criteria were clear. No grades lower than a B, and no major disciplinary infractions. A D and an academic dishonesty referral knocked me right off the list. National Honor Society applications, which were supposed to open that fall for juniors, suddenly felt out of reach. One of the requirements was demonstrated character and integrity. When the sponsor came to our English class to talk about it, I could feel Ms. Donovan's eyes on me every time the word integrity left his mouth. Students with academic dishonesty on their record may have difficulty being accepted, he said, not looking in my direction, but not looking either. Student leadership positions also slipped through my fingers. I'd been planning to run for a spot on the student council. Mrs. Yang gently suggested I let things settle before stepping into a role that required being a role model. You don't want this incident to overshadow your campaign, she said. That's kind of the problem, I said. It overshadows everything, even though it's not true. On paper, my record now said strong grades, except for one glaring D in English. Involved student with an academic integrity violation. People who didn't really know me stopped seeing future scholar. They saw that girl who cheated and still pretends she didn't. Even teachers I'd never had before seemed to have heard. In chemistry, when someone whispered during a quiz, the teacher snapped, "This is Ms. Donovan's class, but I can still give 0s, then glanced at me for half a second. I might have imagined it, but it felt like a spotlight. In history, when I asked a question about a rubric, my teacher said, "Don't overthink it, Maya. Focus on doing your own work." The implication, intentional or not, hung there. The worst part was watching my friends recalibrate around me. Some stuck by me exactly the same. They sat with me at lunch, rolled their eyes at the rumors, made stupid Cheaters Anonymous jokes that at least acknowledged the absurdity of it. Others quietly drifted. They stopped asking me to be in group projects, like my touch might contaminate their grades. They didn't invite me to certain study sessions. I'd walk up to a table, and conversations would slow, then shuffle to another topic. It wasn't blatant hostility. It was social distance, the kind you give someone you're not sure it's safe to be associated with. "She's really smart," I heard one girl say in the bathroom once. "But like she cheated on the big exam." That's a lot. That's a lot. 3 words that flattened years of work into one moment I knew I was innocent of. I wrote the appeal letter for the committee, even though I doubted it would change anything. I laid out the sequence of events step by step, emphasized that my essay and Liam S. looked nothing alike, attached statements from 2 classmates who swore they never saw me passing answers. Weeks later, I got a thin envelope in my homeroom mailbox. The committee had reviewed the case and determined that the teacher's decision fell within the academic dishonesty policy. They encouraged me to use this as a learning opportunity to reflect on the importance of speaking up when I saw cheating. The only concession they offered was that I could retake the course over the summer if I wanted to replace the D with a C on my transcript. Not the exam, the entire course. I stared at the letter, anger and humiliation churning into something heavier. It wasn't that I hadn't learned anything. I had learned a lot. I'd learned that the system we were told to trust was less interested in truth than in preserving the image of infallible adults. I'd learned that once an authority figure writes a story about you, every other adult will read you through that lens. I'd learned that in the hierarchy of school, teacher's word isn't just evidence, it's verdict. At the end of that year, when the honor roll ceremony went on without me and Ms. Donovan's Teacher of the Year, plaque still glinted in the hallway. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by binders and flashcards and stacks of graded papers with A's on them, and felt something in me harden. It wasn't the anger of someone plotting revenge, not yet. It was the realization that truth on its own wasn't enough, not in a system that refused to see it if acknowledging it meant admitting one of their own had been wrong. If I ever wanted that 0 to mean anything other than cheater in my story, I would need more than my word. I would need proof. And one day, a system bigger than my high school to listen. 7 years of fallout by the time the 0 settled into my GPA like a stain. Life on the surface kept moving. Classes changed, semesters rolled over, posters for dances came and went, and a new crop of sophomores replaced us as the kids who stressed too much about grades. But underneath, everything I did from that point forward had a quiet asterisk next to it. It showed up for the first time the day my counselor called me in to talk about college readiness. I was a junior by then. The D in Honors English had been partially patched over by a retake. Ms. Donovan refused to have me in her classroom again, so I sat in a summer school class with a different teacher and clawed my way to a C that replaced the D on my transcript. The original academic dishonesty note, however, didn't disappear. It just got a new line, course retaken grade improved. On paper, my GPA looked respectable again. Not perfect, but good. I had A's in math and science, a B+ in history, even an A in AP psychology. I joined the yearbook staff, helped tutor freshmen, volunteered at the library. It was the kind of resume that, in a different timeline, would have made my counselor beam. Instead, Mrs. Yang tapped a printed copy of my unofficial transcript with a red-tipped finger. "You're still a strong candidate," she said, "but we need to be strategic." "Strategic how?" I asked. "Most of the state schools will look at your overall pattern," she said. "They'll see one blemish and a lot of recovery. You'll definitely get into a solid 4-year university. But some of the more competitive scholarships," she hesitated, "they ask specifically about academic integrity violations." She paused, like she was giving me time to absorb the blow I'd already anticipated. "So I'm just out?" I asked. "Because of one teacher's opinion." "It's not just one teacher's opinion," she said gently. "To them, it's an official incident. They don't know the context." I explained the context in the appeal, I reminded her. "And the appeal board still sided with her. And I understand why that feels unfair," she said. "Really, I do. But from their perspective, if they start overturning teachers on these issues, they open the door to a lot of challenges. They're afraid of undermining classroom authority." There it was again, authority over accuracy. "So what do?" I asked. "Just cross those scholarships off my list." "We can still try," she said. "You can use the optional essay to address what happened. Frame it as a lesson you learned. Show growth." "You mean apologize for something I didn't do?" I said flatly. She didn't say yes. She didn't have to. I walked out with a folder full of college brochures, and the sinking feeling that every application I mailed would carry a secret disclaimer. Strong candidate, except for that one time she cheated. When senior year came around, that feeling hardened into a routine. Every time I filled out a form that asked, "Have you ever been found responsible for academic dishonesty?" I had to check yes. The first time I saw the box, my hand physically resisted. Every part of me wanted to tick no, because the question was wrong. Found responsible, and actually, did it were not the same thing. But lying would have turned their story into the truth. So I checked yes. On one scholarship portal, a little text box popped up immediately. "Please briefly explain the circumstances and what you learned from this incident." What I'd learned was that when you are 16 and a teacher decides you're guilty, there is no jury of your peers. There is just a closed loop of adults who trust each other more than they trust you. I did not write that. Instead, I wrote a tidy paragraph about how, in my sophomore year, I was involved in a situation where another student cheated during an exam, and I failed to report it immediately. How this taught me the importance of speaking up even when it's uncomfortable, and how I had since become more proactive about academic honesty in group settings. It was the kind of answer admission committees like: reflective, humble, hitting the beats of mistake, lesson, growth. It was also, technically, a lie. Not a lie about facts. I was careful to phrase everything in ways Ms. Donovan would have agreed with if she squinted, but a lie about blame. about the fundamental injustice of being branded complicit when all you did was freeze. I mailed that essay with the rest of my application packet and felt like I'd swallowed something jagged. When acceptance letters came, they were good but not magical. I got into a decent state university with a partial scholarship, not the full ride merit award I'd once dreamed of. The big scholarship committee sent a polite email. We had many qualified applicants. Unfortunately, I told myself it was fine. My mom hugged me and said, "We'll make this work." We did late-night kitchen math with a calculator and student loan web pages. It was possible. Tight, but possible. Still, in the back of my mind, I pictured some stranger in an office reading my file, seeing the honesty incident, and sliding my application to the no pile without ever reading the rest. That's the thing about certain words on official paper. They keep speaking long after you've stopped. College was both a relief and a new minefield. On one hand, no one there knew me as the girl who cheated on the big exam. I was just another freshman trying to figure out which building housed the right lecture hall. On the other hand, every syllabus started with a section on academic integrity, and every professor had their own version of Miss Donovan's speech. Plagiarism will not be tolerated. If I catch you cheating, you will get a 0 and be reported to the dean. Don't even think about it. You're adults now. Most students rolled their eyes and moved on. For me, those paragraphs hit a raw nerve every time. I overcorrected. If a professor said you can work together, but hand in your own work, I would avoid even studying in the same room as classmates, terrified our answers might come out too similar. In study groups, when people got too casual sharing old homework, suggesting we just Google a sample essay and tweak it, I shut down. I either said nothing and left, or I delivered a stiff, awkward speech about integrity that made people look at me funny. I wasn't trying to be the morality police. I just couldn't stand the idea of even accidentally stepping near that line again. I kept receipts on everything. Screenshots of draft timestamps, Google Doc version histories, email threads showing when I submitted what. If a professor ever questioned my work, I wanted proof ready. No one did, not at first, but the fear of being questioned sat in the back of my mind like a permanent alert. The incident changed how I related to authority too. When professors made mistakes, misgraded papers, missed attendance marks, I spoke up, but always with an edge of panic. I rehearsed my wording before I stepped into their office hours, terrified that any hint of challenge would flip some invisible switch, and suddenly I'd be the problem student again. Most of them were reasonable. They'd check their spreadsheet, fix the error, apologize. One professor, though, gave me a familiar chill. Senior year, I had an ethics class with a woman who loved power plays. She'd cold call students, humiliate them if they weren't ready, and assign participation points based on how much she liked your arguments, not their substance. When she misrecorded one of my quiz grades as a 0, I went to her office with printouts. The original quiz with a 9-10 written on it, the online gradebook screenshot, the syllabus. There must have been a mistake, I said, trying to keep my voice even. She took the quiz, glanced at it, and shrugged. "Oh, I must have clicked the wrong field," she said. She tapped her keyboard a few times. fixed now. That was it. No drama, no lecture, no accusation. I walked out feeling shaky, the way you feel after narrowly avoiding a car accident. It shouldn't have been a big deal. It wasn't for anyone else. But my body remembered what it was like to stand in an office while an adult in a professional outfit calmly told another adult, "We have to trust our staff," as if that sentence ended the conversation. By the time I graduated, I built a life on top of the scar. New friends, a degree, a modest but real sense that I could build something for myself. If the story had ended there, Ms. Donovan would have remained just an unpleasant footnote in my life, a cautionary tale about how unfair things can be. But sometimes life gives you callbacks. Mine came in the form of a TikTok comment. I was 23, a year out of college, working my first real job at a nonprofit that helped high school kids with college applications. I spent my days reading personal statements, explaining FAFSA, and teaching juniors how to list their extracurriculars without sounding like robots. One night, after a particularly long session, I posted a quick, anonymous video about handling unfair grades. Nothing dramatic, just a face-to-camera rant about how you're allowed to advocate for yourself respectfully, and how teachers are human too. They can be wrong. I didn't name names or schools. It was cathartic more than anything. The video got more traction than I expected. Comments poured in from kids venting about all kinds of things. Teachers losing assignments, grading girls harder than boys, accusing them of copying when they hadn't. But one comment stopped me cold. "Lol, this is giving big Ms. Donovan energy," someone wrote. She accused my brother of cheating last year just because he finished early and didn't look stressed. I read it 3 times. Then I replied, "What school?" They answered. It was mine. Another user chimed in. "Wait, is that the AP English teacher who failed my cousin for plagiarism, but wouldn't show her the Turnitin report?" "Yes," another said. "She made me cry freshman year. Said I was too dumb to have written my essay without help." The thread kept growing. Story after story, different years, different classes, same pattern. Accusations of cheating with flimsy or non-existent evidence. Humiliation in front of the class. Dismissal when students tried to defend themselves. My stomach knotted. At 16, I'd wondered if I was the exception. Maybe I'd just been unlucky, the one kid she'd misread. At 23, scrolling through comment after comment, I realized I had been the template. She had spent years wielding integrity like a weapon, cutting down any student who made her feel challenged or out of control, and the system had let her, because on paper she produced good test scores and rigorous essays. I thought about the kids I worked with every day, the ones whose whole future hinged on a few lines on a transcript and some neat narratives adults wrote about them. I imagined one of them being branded the way I had been, watching scholarship opportunities vanish because a teacher decided to make an example out of them. The old anger flared up, but it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the recurring pattern. One of the commenters mentioned that their parents had tried to file a formal complaint, but the school said there wasn't enough to do anything. No formal records then, just like when I was there. In my job, I'd learned something important. Schools are not the final authority. Above them, there are districts. Above districts, there are state departments. Above individual teachers, there are licensing boards. Those boards have one job: to protect students and uphold professional standards. They are also often underused because most families don't realize they exist, or they feel too small to take on the system. I was older now. I knew how to write clearly, organize evidence, and navigate bureaucracy. I knew how much damage a single dishonest note in a file could do. And for the first time since high school, I realized I might be able to put that knowledge to use for more than just helping kids dodge bad essay topics. I started pulling on threads. I dug through old boxes until I found the folder my mom had kept. Copies of the original discipline referral, my appeal letter, the committee's response. I logged into the half-defunct student portal and downloaded my final transcript, where a faint asterisk still led to a footnote about academic dishonesty in 10th grade and course retaken. I messaged the commenter whose brother had dealt with her recently. We hopped on a call. They told me details, dates, class, what she'd accused him of, how the school had brushed them off. I reached out to 2 former classmates who'd offhandedly mentioned their own run-ins with her over the years. Both were still salty. Both had, at the time, shrugged and said, "What can you do? It's her word." Now, as adults with some distance, they were angrier. "If you're actually thinking of doing something, I'll write a statement," one said. "She made me feel like garbage for months." "I've got emails," another said. "My mom saved them. She never trusted that woman." The picture was coming together. It wasn't just one misjudged incident. It was a pattern of abusing authority, of slapping the cheater label on any student who didn't act exactly the way she wanted during tests, then hiding behind policy when challenged. I started researching. Every state has some kind of teacher standards board or professional practices commission. Their websites aren't flashy. They're buried under layers of government links, full of PDFs and phrases like code of ethics and grounds for disciplinary action. Behind that dry language is a simple idea. Teaching is a licensed profession. And like any licensed profession, medicine, law, therapy, there are consequences when someone repeatedly harms the people they're supposed to serve. I read the code of ethics line by line. There were sections on maintaining appropriate boundaries, on avoiding discrimination, on following district policies. There was also a section on falsifying or misrepresenting facts in the evaluation of students, and on abuse of professional authority. I thought about Ms. Donovan telling the assistant principal with a straight face that my silence was proof of my guilt. About her ignoring Liam's attempt to take full responsibility. About her turning every appeal into a lecture about integrity while refusing to examine any evidence that might complicate her narrative. Maybe, taken alone, my case would be a gray area. But combined with a pattern of similar stories, it started to look less like rigor and more like misconduct. I hadn't seen Ms. Donovan in 7 years, but as I sat there in my tiny apartment, surrounded by photocopies and old emails, I could hear her voice like she was still standing over my desk. I expect integrity. I will not reward anyone for trying to game the system. For the first time, I found myself agreeing with her. Except this time, I wasn't the one gaming anything. She was. And I was finally in a position to do something about it. That night, I opened a new document. At the top, I typed, "Formal complaint professional misconduct of Ms. Alina Donovan, English teacher." My hands shook a little as I wrote the first paragraph, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't about getting my grade changed anymore. It was about making sure the zero that had haunted me for 7 years wasn't just a private injustice, but the first entry in a much bigger case file that, if I did this right, would end with her holding a very different kind of paper. A notice that she was no longer allowed to teach for building the case writing formal complaint professional misconduct of Ms. Alina Donovan. At the top of a blank document felt dramatic at first, like something out of a legal drama instead of my very ordinary life. But the longer I stared at the words, the less dramatic it felt and the more necessary. For 7 years, every time I thought about what happened in that classroom, I had two competing voices in my head. One said, "Let it go. It's over. You survived. You have a degree, a job. Don't go poking the bear." The other said, "She's still in a room with kids who can't fight back yet." Working at a college access nonprofit meant I saw, every day, how easy it was to derail a student's trajectory with one bad line on a transcript. When we helped juniors fill out scholarship forms, and there was nothing ugly in the discipline section, I felt relieved on their behalf in a way I never admitted out loud, because I knew what it was like when there was something there. The TikTok comments and DMs were the tipping point. It was one thing to know abstractly that Ms. Donovan was strict. It was another to hear from actual students and parents that she'd kept doing the same thing she did to me, accusing kids of cheating with flimsy evidence, humiliating them in front of their peers, dismissing any attempt to defend themselves. She wasn't a one-off bad day. She was a pattern. And patterns, I'd learned, are what systems pay attention to. The first step was figuring out where exactly to complain. The high school had already made their position clear. They'd rather swallow nails than admit she'd mishandled anything. Going back to them would be like asking a locked door politely to open itself. Above the school, though, there was the district. Above the district, the state. I spent a weekend going down government website rabbit holes, the kind where every click opens a new PDF with titles like Code of Professional Practices and Conduct for Educators. The language was dry, but underneath, the bureaucratic phrasing was a simple idea. Teachers hold licenses, and those licenses come with rules. There were sections about not abusing students, about maintaining boundaries, about not falsifying records. One line in particular made my pulse jump. An educator shall not knowingly misrepresent or falsify facts concerning a student's academic performance or conduct. I thought about Ms. Donovan calmly telling an administrator that I'd allowed cheating. even after Liam tried to take full blame. How she'd refused to look at any evidence that complicated her story because it would mean admitting she'd been wrong. In any other profession, deliberately ignoring exonerating information and insisting on your version might be called negligence. Here, it had been called professional judgment. Maybe it was time to ask someone outside that building whether they agreed. Most states have some version of a professional standards board or Office of Educator licensure. Their websites all say some variation of, if you believe a licensed educator has violated the code of conduct, you may file a complaint. Include specific dates, actions, and supporting documentation. That part, at least, I knew how to do. My entire academic life had been practice in assembling evidence. I started by collecting everything I could about my own case. My mom had kept a folder, of course she had. It had been sitting in a box in our hall closet, next to old report cards and expired warranties. Inside there was a copy of the original academic dishonesty referral Ms. Donovan had filed, written in her precise, slanted handwriting. The assistant principal's summary of our meeting, complete with lines like, "Student admitted to seeing another student cheat and failed to report." I had never used the word admitted, but there it was, as if I had signed a confession. My appeal letter to the school committee, outlining the timeline and protesting the punishment. The committee's bland response, saying the decision fell within policy and should serve as a learning opportunity. I scanned each page into PDFs and organized them in a folder on my laptop labeled Donovan Case Original. Then I downloaded my final high school transcript from the old portal. In tiny print near the bottom, there was the asterisk. Note, academic dishonesty, incident in grade 10 English. Course retaken, grade improved. It had followed me to college applications. It was still there, a permanent footnote on my teenage years. Next, I gathered other people's stories. I went back to that TikTok thread and DM'd the students who'd mentioned her. A few didn't respond. Social media is fleeting, and not everyone wants to relive their worst school moments with a stranger. But 3 did. We moved our conversations off the public app and onto private calls and emails. One was a girl named Sienna, a current senior at my old school. Her voice shook with anger even months after the incident. She said my essay was too polished to have been written without outside help, Sienna told me. I told her I'd worked on it all weekend. She asked if my parents helped. I said my mom read it once for typos. She called that unauthorized assistance and gave me a 0. Did she show you any proof of plagiarism? I asked. No, Sienna said. She refused to run it through Turnitin. She said she didn't need software to tell when a student was lying. Her parents had met with the principal, who'd backed Ms. Donovan. There was now an integrity incident in Sienna's file too. Another was a guy named Carlos, 2 years younger than me. He had Ms. Donovan for freshman English. She accused me of cheating on a quiz because I finished early and put my pencil down, he said. I'd studied. I'm good at multiple choice. She said no one finishes that fast without help and gave me a 0. When I asked what I was supposed to have done differently, she said, Take your time and stop trying to game the system. His grade had recovered because the quiz wasn't heavily weighted, but the referral was still there, a warning in his file. The third, Lena, had a story that sounded uncomfortably close to mine. She found a cheat sheet under the desk after a test and assumed it was mine, Lena said. It was literally a different handwriting. I told her I hadn't written it. She said, "Then you benefited from an environment of dishonesty and did nothing to stop it." She loves that phrase. Lena's parents had tried to complain to the district, but without documentation beyond the school's own write-up, the district had sent them back down the chain. The school said they handled it internally, Lena said bitterly, which meant they circled the wagons and protected her. None of us had, on our own, enough to force a redo of our high school careers. But together, a pattern emerged. She routinely interpreted neutral behavior as suspicious. She conflated not reporting other students' behavior with active cheating. She refused to review or share objective evidence, like plagiarism reports. She used the academic dishonesty policy as a blunt instrument to make examples of kids. And each time, the school had backed her, leaving families feeling handled, but not heard. I asked each of them the same question. If there were a way to file a formal complaint at the state level, would you be willing to write a statement? All three said yes. Honestly, if it keeps her from doing this to some other kid who doesn't have a mom like yours, I'll do whatever, Sienna said. I reached out to two of my old classmates as well, the ones who had seen Liam try to confess on my behalf and Ms. Donovan ignore it. Do you remember that day? I asked them. I will never forget her face, one said. He literally said, "It was my cheat sheet, give me the 0, and she refused. I thought it was messed up, but I didn't know what to do." Would you be willing to put that in writing? I asked. Absolutely, she said. Now I had more than feelings and faded outrage. I had dates, names, classes, specific incidents, and multiple witnesses. The next step was shaping all of it into something a board would take seriously. Legal complaints aren't like angry emails. They can't just say, "This was unfair," and expect action. They have to show how specific actions violated specific rules, over time, in ways that mattered. I asked one of my coworkers for advice. She'd gone to law school before pivoting into nonprofit work. Don't write it like a rant, she said. Write it like a timeline. Stick to facts. Quote the code of conduct directly. The more you sound like you understand their process, the harder it is for them to dismiss you. So that's what I did. I opened my draft complaint and began with the basics. My name, contact information, Ms. Donovan's full name, subject, and school. A clear statement. I am filing this complaint to report a pattern of professional misconduct related to the misrepresentation of students, academic conduct, and the abusive use of academic dishonesty policies. Then, I laid out my story in chronological order. The exam, the cheat sheet under Liam's paper, my attempts to defend myself, the school's decision, the impact on my grade and opportunities. After each key moment, I connected it to the relevant guideline. Where the code prohibited knowingly misrepresenting facts about a student's academic performance, I pointed out that that she had described my silence as admission of guilt despite contradictory evidence, and even a confession from the actual cheater. Where the code demanded fair and equitable treatment of all students, I highlighted how she had treated Liam's self-incriminating statement as irrelevant while punishing me equally. Then I added the others. Separate sections summarized Sienna S., Carlos's, and Lena's experiences. I anonymized them at first student A, B, C, and attached their signed statements as exhibits. I showed how, in each case, Ms. Donovan had interpreted non-cheating behavior, finishing early, polished writing, sitting near a cheat sheet as proof of cheating, refused to provide evidence or engage in a fair review, leveraged the academic dishonesty label in a way that had long-term consequences. I emphasized that these were not isolated misunderstandings, but part of a pattern spanning at least 7 years. I also made sure to say what I wasn't claiming. I wasn't arguing that high standards or strict tests were wrong. I wasn't saying teachers shouldn't enforce academic integrity. I was saying that misusing those standards, ignoring exonerating information, punishing kids for not being perfect whistleblowers, refusing any review, was itself a violation of professional ethics. I attached copies of every document I had, my referral and appeal, email threads from Sienna's parents with the school, notes from Carlos's conference, Lena's incident report. By the time I finished, the complaint was 12 pages long, not counting exhibits. I printed it once and read it aloud to myself. It didn't sound like a teenager's rant anymore. It sounded like what it was, a detailed report of a professional abusing a power imbalance. The last paragraph took me the longest to write. I didn't just want to ask for punishment. I wanted to be clear about the stakes. As an adult, I have moved forward with my life despite the damage done by this teacher's actions, I wrote. However, Ms. Donovan continues to teach new cohorts of students every year. Many of them lack the resources or confidence to challenge her. I am submitting this complaint not to relitigate my own grades, but to prevent future harm. I respectfully request that the board investigate her conduct, review the attached documentation, and determine whether she remains fit to hold a license entrusted with young people's futures. When I was satisfied, I saved the document, attached the exhibits, and filled out the state's online submission form. There was a field for describe the allegation in 500 words or less, which I summarized from my longer complaint, and a place to upload supporting files. My finger hovered over the submit button for a long time. Part of me still felt like a kid in Ms. Donovan's classroom, about to raise my hand and say, "Excuse me, this isn't fair," expecting to be shut down. But I wasn't 16 anymore. I was a grown woman with a degree, a job, and a stack of evidence. And this time, I wasn't appealing to a principal who had coffee with her every morning. I clicked submit. A confirmation screen popped up. Your complaint has been received. Case number 241187. You may be contacted for additional information. I sat back in my chair and stared at the number. It didn't mean she was guilty. It didn't mean they'd do anything. It meant, for the first time, something official existed about her other than glowing evaluations and test scores. A few weeks later, a letter arrived in my mailbox from the State Department of Education. I held my breath as I opened it. It wasn't a verdict. It was acknowledgement. They de-reviewed my complaint, found it sufficiently specific, and were opening an investigation. They asked for permission to contact the other students I'd mentioned, and for any additional documentation I might obtain. They also noted that Ms. Donovan and the district would be notified and given a chance to respond. My hands shook as I folded the letter back into its envelope. Somewhere across town, Ms. Donovan would be getting her own letter. For once, she would be the one called to explain herself to a higher authority. The system that had protected her for years was about to look, however briefly, in the other direction. I didn't know yet how far it would go. I didn't know how she would react, or whether the board would ultimately agree with me that her behavior crossed the line from strict to unethical. But I did know one thing. For the first time since I watched her write that red 0 on my exam, I felt like I was no longer playing by rules she'd written. I was operating on a different level now, and she was going to have to answer to it. 5. Testifying Against Her. The email came 3 months after I submitted the complaint. Subject line: Notice of Investigatory Conference Case 24-1187. I opened it with the same mix of dread and adrenaline I used to feel before big exams. The state board had reviewed my materials, interviewed the other students I'd mentioned, and decided there was enough to move to the next step: a formal conference where both sides would present information. It wasn't a courtroom, technically. No jury, no gavel. Just a panel of board members, educators, administrators, one lawyer charged with deciding whether Ms. Donovan's behavior violated the professional code. They wanted me there as a witness. I printed the letter and took it to my mom's house that weekend. She sat at the kitchen table where we'd once spread out scholarship forms and stared at the heading in silence. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked eventually. The question wasn't dismissive. It was protective. She knew what it felt like to stand in front of people with clipboards and polite faces, explaining why you think someone with power has misused it. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. "I'm not doing this for high school me. I'm doing it for the kids she's teaching right now." She exhaled slowly. "Then we'll do it right." We practiced. We sat with my complaint, the state's code of conduct, and a legal pad. She played devil's advocate, asking questions she thought the board might throw at me. "How do you know she knowingly misrepresented your actions? What if she just interpreted them differently? What makes this more than a harsh teacher enforcing rules? What would you say to someone who thinks you're just holding a grudge about a grade?" I answered, stumbled, tried again. We talked about the difference between intention and impact. Maybe Ms. Donovan genuinely believed she was protecting academic integrity. But good intentions don't erase harm, especially when the person causing it refuses to listen when students say, "You're wrong about what happened." The day of the conference, I took off work and caught an early train to the state capitol. The board building was one of those anonymous government blocks, beige walls, fluorescent lights, linoleum floors that echoed with every step. My hands shook so badly in the elevator that I almost dropped my folder. When I reached the waiting area, there was only one other person sitting there with a manila envelope in her lap. I recognized her profile before my brain fully caught up. Ms. Donovan. 7 years had passed, but she looked eerily similar. The same sharp bob, the same precise lipstick, the same posture that broadcasted control. Only the lines around her mouth were deeper. She looked up as the receptionist said my name. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then something flickered across her face, recognition, annoyance, maybe a flash of disbelief that a kid she'd once told, "This decision is final," had somehow dragged her here. "Maya," she said tightly, "I see you're still invested in this." "Apparently the board is too," I said before I could stop myself. She pursed her lips and looked away, flipping through her papers like I was a minor inconvenience. A door opened. A staff member called our case number and asked us to come in. The conference room was long and windowless, with a table in the middle and a panel of 5 people at one end. Nameplates identified them as Dr. Collins' chair, Ms. Rivera, Mr. Ahmed, and 2 others whose titles blurred together in my anxiety. Ms. Donovan sat on one side of the table with someone from her union. I sat on the other, alone, but holding my folder like a shield. Dr. Collins began with introductions and a reminder of the purpose of the meeting, to determine whether Ms. Donovan's conduct, as alleged, violated the state's code. "This is not a criminal proceeding," he said. "Our concern is professional fitness to teach." They started by asking me to recount my experience. I told this story so many times to my mom, to friends, to college admissions essays, that I could have recited it in my sleep. But saying it here, under oath, in front of a woman who still refused to admit she'd been wrong, was different. I took a breath. "I was 16, I began. I was in her honors English class. The final exam was worth 40% of our grade. I walked them through it all. The test, the rules, the cheat sheet under Liam's exam. My decision to cover my paper instead of raising my hand. The after-class confrontation. The red zeros. I described the meeting with the assistant principal, the appeal that went nowhere, the long-term impact on my grades and opportunities. When I applied for college, I said, I had to check yes on every form that asked if I'd ever been found responsible for academic dishonesty. I had to explain it over and over. I lost access to certain scholarships that required a clean record. My voice only cracked once when I mentioned what it felt like to hear the words, "We have to support our teachers unless there's clear evidence to the contrary." "Did you ever admit to cheating?" Ms. Rivera asked. "No," I said. "I admitted to noticing Liam looking at my paper once and covering it. I never gave him answers. I never had notes. I never used my phone. The only thing I was guilty of was being scared to interrupt the exam." "And Liam?" Mr. Ahmed asked. "What did he say?" "He tried to take full responsibility," I said. "He said the cheat sheet was his and that I didn't help him. He asked her to just give him the 0. She refused. She said this wasn't about punishment, it was about principles, and that we had both violated her trust." I could feel Ms. Donovan tensing beside me. The union rep leaned toward her and whispered something. She shook her head slightly. The board then asked about the other incidents I'd cited. I summarized Sienna S., Carlos's, and Lena's experiences, then indicated where their written statements were in the packet the board had received. Ms. Rivera flipped through a document, her brow furrowing. In each of these cases, she said, the teacher's response appears to have been the harshest possible interpretation of the situation. Did the school administration ever review or modify her decisions? Not that we're aware of, I said. Every time families complained, they were told the same thing. We trust our staff. Thank you, Dr. Collins said. You may be asked follow-up questions later. Then it was Ms. Donovan's turn. She straightened her papers and launched into her defense, voice crisp. I have been an educator for over 15 years, she began. My students routinely score above state averages on standardized exams. I have always maintained rigorous standards and high expectations. Unfortunately, not all students meet those expectations, and some look for shortcuts. She described the same incidents I'd described, but through her lens. She called my case a regrettable but necessary enforcement of policy. She insisted she'd observed clear indications of collaboration between Liam and me, that my failure to report was tantamount to condoning cheating. If I had let that go, she said, I would have sent a message to the entire class that academic integrity is optional. She painted the other students' stories as misunderstandings and emotional overreactions to being held accountable. Teenagers are not always reliable narrators of their own conduct, she said. They often feel persecuted by rules they don't like. Do you believe Maya cheated on that exam? Ms. Rivera asked bluntly. Ms. Donovan hesitated for the first time. I believe, she said carefully, that she failed to uphold her responsibility in an exam setting. Whether she actively supplied answers or passively allowed copying, the effect on fairness was the same. That's not what I asked, Ms. Rivera said. Did you ever see her use unauthorized notes, look at another student's paper, or give answers to another student? No, Ms. Donovan admitted. I saw suspicious behavior and chose to interpret it in light of the evidence of cheating in her immediate vicinity. So you did not see her cheat, Ms. Rivera said, but you concluded she must have been involved. Ms. Donovan's jaw clenched. I concluded she did not act with integrity. Mr. Ahmed leaned forward. Did you consider giving her a lesser consequence? For example, a warning for not reporting, while giving the 0 and referral only to the student with the cheat sheet? No, she said. That would have communicated that integrity is negotiable. Or that context matters, Mr. Ahmed murmured, almost to himself. The union rep finally spoke up, framing Ms. Donovan as a dedicated teacher under attack by disgruntled former students. He argued that high expectations inevitably create resentment, and that disciplining her would send a chilling message to other teachers trying to enforce standards. Dr. Collins listened, expression unreadable. When they finished, he turned back to me. Maya, he said, if Ms. Donovan had apologized back then, had acknowledged that she might have misjudged your intent, would you have filed this complaint? I thought about it. If she had listened, I said slowly, if she had looked at the evidence and treated me like a student telling the truth instead of a problem to neutralize, no. I would have been hurt, but I would have moved on. So why now? Because she didn't just do it to me, I said. She kept doing it to kids who didn't have parents who knew how to navigate appeals, to kids who lost opportunities because one teacher decided to make an example out of them. I can handle being misunderstood. What I can't handle is knowing she's still in a classroom, writing zeros and referrals whenever a student doesn't perform anxiety in the exact way she expects. There was a long silence. Dr. Collins thanked us both and said the board would deliberate privately. They'd notify us in writing of their decision. When I stepped out into the hallway, the air felt thick. Ms. Donovan brushed past me without a word, heels clicking sharply. For the first time, she didn't look composed. She looked rattled. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt wrung out. On the train ride home, I stared out the window at the smudged city lights and thought about how strange it was that a single exam taken in a fluorescent lit classroom could ripple so far into the future. No matter what the board decided, I'd finally done something my 16-year-old self never could. I'd raised my hand and refused to sit down when I was told to. 6 license revoked and real closure. The envelope came on a Tuesday, which felt rude. Important life letters should arrive on dramatic days, Fridays with thunderstorms, Mondays that already feel cursed, not on a random weekday when you're debating whether to order takeout or cook pasta. It was plain white, with the return address of the State Department of Education in the top left corner. My heart tried to climb into my throat. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd written college essays and the original complaint, and slid my finger under the flap. There were 3 pages inside. The first line of the first page told me everything I needed to know. After careful review of the evidence and testimony presented, the board finds that Ms. Alina Donovan has engaged in conduct inconsistent with the standards of professional responsibility required of licensed educators in this state. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My eyes skimmed. They listed the findings: that she had repeatedly exercised poor professional judgment in applying academic dishonesty policies, that in my case, she had assigned the most severe penalty without sufficient evidence of direct cheating, that in other cases, she had failed to consider exculpatory information and refused reasonable requests for review. They quoted the code section about misrepresenting or falsifying facts about student conduct. They concluded that, while high expectations are commendable, her actions constituted an abuse of authority that negatively impacted students' educational opportunities. The sanction: the board hereby revokes Ms. Donovan's teaching license for a period of no less than 5 years, after which she may petition for reinstatement subject to evidence of remediation and further training in ethical practice. I read that sentence 3 times. Revoked. Not suspended for a semester. Not don't do it again. Revoked. I turned to the second page. It contained a summary of her response, including her insistence that she'd only ever tried to protect integrity. The board acknowledged her years of service and her positive evaluations, but they didn't let that outweigh the harm. The last paragraph mentioned me by pseudonym. The complainant has demonstrated significant resilience in overcoming the consequences of the respondent's actions. However, the persistence of similar incidents over time underscores the need to protect current and future students from further harm. I put the pages down, stared at the table, and let the weight of it sink in. For 7 years, the power dynamic had been simple: her word, my denial; her authority, my damage; her plaque on the wall, my asterisk on the transcript. Now, for the first time, there was a piece of official paper where the roles were reversed. She was the educator whose professional conduct had been found lacking. I was the student whose account had been validated. A part of me wanted to feel triumphant, like the heroes in movies who walk away from courtroom victories to triumphant music. Instead, what I felt was quiet, not empty, not disappointed, just a kind of deep, exhausted relief, like finally putting down a heavy box you've been carrying upstairs for years. She hadn't apologized. The board's letter made it clear that she still insisted she'd done the right thing. Maybe she lay awake at night, furious at me, telling herself stories about ungrateful students and a system that had gone soft. That was her problem now. I texted my mom a photo of the letter. She called me immediately. "They revoked it?" she asked, voice caught between shock and satisfaction. "For at least 5 years," I said. "She can try to get it back after that, but only if she does some kind of training and convinces them she's changed." My mom exhaled slowly. "She'll probably never teach again, not here. No district wants a teacher with that kind of mark on their record." I thought of Ms. Donovan, who'd once told us, "Your reputation is all you have. Protect it." Now hers carried the one word she'd weaponized against us: unprofessional. "Do you feel better?" my mom asked. I thought about it. "I feel finished," I said. "Like the story doesn't end with the teacher was right because she's the teacher." "Good," she said. "You deserved that much." Later, I called Sienna, Carlos, and Lena, the students who'd given statements. "They revoked her license," I told them. Sienna screamed into the phone. "Are you serious? You're kidding." Carlos laughed. The bitter edge in his voice softened. "About time someone held her accountable for something." Lena just said, quietly, "Thank you." Their relief mattered more to me than any abstract sense of justice. Because here's the thing: the board's decision didn't give me back the scholarship I lost, the nights I spent sick with anxiety before exams, or the years of feeling like a cheater every time I checked yes in a disciplinary box. It didn't erase the social damage, the friendships that faded, the way I'd second-guess myself every time a professor raised an eyebrow at my work. Those consequences were baked into my history. What it did do was draw a line. It said this was wrong, not just in the whispered, after-school way, not just in texts between friends years later. On paper, in the system, that matters. We talk a lot about karma, like it's some mystical force that eventually gets bad people. Most of the time, what we call karma is just consequence finally catching up where it had been delayed. For Ms. Donovan, karma looked like an official letter from a licensing board saying, "No more." For me, it looked like another kind of letter, one I didn't expect. A few months after the decision, an email landed in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line just said, "Thank you." It was from a parent whose kid was currently at my old high school. "I heard about what happened with Miss Donovan through the grapevine," she wrote. "My son had her freshman year. She called him a plagiarist because he wrote an essay that was too good and refused to believe he hadn't copied. We didn't know there was a way to challenge her beyond the principal, and honestly, we were exhausted. He's doing better now, but that year almost broke him. Knowing that someone finally held her accountable means more than you know. Thank you for not letting it go." I reread that email any time I wondered whether the fight had been worth it. Because in the end, this story was never just about a zero. It was about the power adults have over kids' lives and what happens when they misuse it. It was about systems that default to protecting their own and how long it can take for someone to say, "Wait, what if we listened to the student for once?" It was about a scared 16-year-old who went from whispering, "I didn't cheat," in an office where no one believed her, to a 20-something who walked into a room of professionals, told the same story, and watched them actually write it down. I still keep my high school transcript in a folder. The asterisk is still there. The note about academic dishonesty is still there too. Bureaucracy has a long memory. But now, right next to that folder in my filing cabinet, there's another one. Inside it is the board's decision letter, stamped and signed. Every once in a while, when I'm working with a student who's convinced one bad grade has ruined their life, I think about those two folders. One says, "You were labeled a cheater at 16. The other says, "We've seen the whole story, and we believe you." If you've ever been falsely accused by a teacher, a boss, anyone with a title, you probably know how those two realities can coexist for a while. You don't get to rewrite the past, but sometimes, if you're patient and stubborn enough, you get to write an epilogue. Mine is simple. The teacher who ruined my life with a zero can't teach anymore. Not because I got revenge, but because, for once, the system listened to the kid.